Hello and welcome to Asking for a Trend. I'm Josh Lipton, and for the next half hour, we are breaking down the trends of today that'll move stocks tomorrow. There's a lot to keep track of, so we're focusing on what you need to know to get ahead of the curve. Here's some of the trends we're going to be diving into. It's a mixed day for markets as trade uncertainty weighs on investors, but overall, a strong month. The S&P 500 is up more than 6%. Both the Dow and the S&P snapping a 3-month losing streak. And President Trump set to speak soon in Pennsylvania just days after he announced a planned partnership between U.S. Steel and Japan's Nippon Steel. Plus, the back and forth tariff policy from the Trump administration taking a toll on the gaming industry. We've got an inside look with a top researcher on that sector that is straight ahead. Well, President Trump making a stop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to celebrate Nippon Steel's planned partnership with U.S. Steel. For more on the latest, let's get to Yahoo Finance's Jennifer Schonberger. Jen.
Hey Josh, President Trump en route right now to Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, where he is set to hold a rally around 5 p.m. Eastern at a U.S. Steel plant where he will tout a deal for Japan Nippon Steel's investment in U.S. Steel. We're hoping to gain a lot more information about that deal this evening. Ahead of the rally this evening, the president announced the new partnership last Friday between U.S. Steel and Nippon on social media, saying that, quote, it will create at least 70,000 jobs and add $14 billion to the U.S. economy. He said the bulk of that investment will occur in the next 14 months. Now, Trump told reporters recently that the deal will include Nippon making an investment and that it is a partial ownership that will be controlled in part by the USA. There are a lot of question marks about what this deal is going to look like. There were reports it will have a U.S. CEO, a U.S. majority-owned board, and that there will be a golden share, which is essentially shorthand for requiring the U.S. government to approve board seats to make sure that production levels are not cut. U.S. Steel saying in a statement that, quote, U.S. Steel will remain American and we will grow bigger and stronger through a partnership with Nippon Steel that brings massive investment, new technologies, and thousands of jobs over the next 4 years. The president's rally expected around 5 p.m. Eastern. Josh?
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Well, the video game industry is at a crossroads. After booming during the pandemic, growth has cooled, but a new wave of innovation is stirring things up again. From the long-awaited release of Nintendo's next-gen console, powered by NVIDIA chips, to the growing influence of AI, the gaming world is entering a new frontier. And joining us now for more is Lewis Ward, IDC Research Director of XR Gaming and Interactive 3D Software. Lewis, it is great to see you. So I want to start high level, Lewis, because I want your take on how healthy the gaming industry is right now. During the pandemic, Lewis, I used to call you then for your very smart insight analysis on this industry. It's been a while. Listen, people were at home. Gaming was the thing to do. But spinning ahead now, Lewis, May 2025, how healthy, how resilient, what kind of growth are we seeing?
I think it really depends on the region. So globally, things were pretty flat, if not down last year, and they've kind of been trending lower since the pandemic spike you mentioned, like 2021, 2022. In 2025, we do expect a rebound. We expect mobile growth worldwide to be up high single digits, consoles to be up maybe mid-single digits, and PC-based spending up low single digits. But having said that, the U.S., there's just a lot of uncertainty around the tariff situation and physical goods, right? So not just PCs and gaming systems, but all the accessories and everything else that goes along with it if they're made in China, right? And so in the U.S., for example, we're projecting slower growth in those global rates, partly because we're kind of anticipating a negative hit. And how negative is very much up in the air.
Let me ask you, Lewis, you mentioned consoles. I want to dig into that because next week we've got Nintendo, right, introducing the Switch 2, which uses NVIDIA's chips. How popular is that device going to be, Lewis? What do you think demand's going to look like?
Right. Well, I think it'll be close to what Switch has done. So maybe, kind of hedging my bets here, but basically through the first 4 years on the market. So my current forecast goes through 2028. We have Switch 2 shipping about 83 million units. Switch original Switch and all the other SKUs associated with it did about 80 million over its first 4 years on the market. So it's a little bit ahead, but Switch also launched 1 quarter earlier in the first quarter of 2017 versus the second quarter of 2025. So once you net those out, the difference is, within the margin of error, basically. So we're effectively expecting the hardware, at least, to more or less do what Switch has done.
And the Switch 2 I mentioned, Louis, so using NVIDIA chips, can you explain for folks what those NVIDIA chips do for video games, for the industry, why they're so sought after?
Well, NVIDIA's been out in front of a lot of trends related to GPUs in particular, right? So the RTX, I think it's Series 50 today, is, cutting edge in terms of the power and performance, right? So the number of frame rates you can get per second in a high-end PC game, for example, in their GPUs. But you mentioned the consoles, and so what we expect for Switch 2 is that some games will be playable on Switch 2, which simply were not playable on original Switch consoles. So the Cyberpunk 2077 is coming out for Switch 2. I think I'm going to try to get a copy of that to see how quickly it runs. But supposedly some of these games are going to run at, 40, 50, 60 frames a second and possibly have ray tracing, which is like a very much a leap forward, right? So at the end of the day, what you get with them relative to, AMD has its own chips and Intel's trying to get in around the corner with Arc Battle Mage, I believe, is their new GPU. But at the end of the day, they're kind of setting the benchmark for what high-end GPUs can do. And basically, we expect faster performance, higher frame rates, better looking games, right? At the end of the day, that's what gamers are willing to pay for.
And what about tariffs, Louis? Front and center for investors. How are the companies that you know so well in this industry, how are they navigating that dynamic?
If you ask different companies, you'll get a very different answer depending on whether they're manufacturing their goods and services or goods in China and shipping it here, right? So to the extent that they're heavily dependent on China and to the extent that they are subject to the current tariffs, they're in pain, right? And so generally speaking, the average hit right now appears to be in the range of a 40% tariff in terms of how much the additional cost it will be to get most accessories or game systems that are applicable to the current tariffs are going to be. And then the question is, how much do the companies pass that on directly to the consumer? As you can see, Xbox immediately said, or last month said, they're raising their console prices $80 to $110. Nintendo with Switch 2 kept them the same, but they pushed up accessory prices by $5 or $10. Sony hasn't done anything yet, but there's a big shoe to drop there. And of course, there's all sorts of gaming mice, accessories, everything else that's applicable to it. So it depends on the company. It depends on how much they're, based in China and they can't move elsewhere. But at the end of the day, when prices go up, demand goes down. And so that's kind of what we're expecting.
Luz, I also want your take on Grand Theft Auto 6. Now, we know push back to 2026, but I am curious, Luz, just get your take. How big a moment do you think that is going to be for Take-Two and the broader industry?
Oh, it's huge. So, even when it was expected to come this year, games were kind of moving out of that window to give Grand Theft Auto 6 its own kind of, runway, because they figured if you're coming out at the same time, you're going to be, basically get crushed under it. So there's huge expectations for it. In some ways, that's a little bit dangerous for Take-Two because the anticipation is so high. It's obviously also a huge opportunity. And so it's the type of game that is a system seller that is going to, have potentially, like Grand Theft Auto Online has had, a very long tail of revenue being generated from it. And I'll be very interested to see how Take-Two is, updating it, because Grand Theft Auto Online did not launch with Grand Theft Auto 5. It came later. So now that they've had time to know what that, kind of the recurring revenue stream is like, I'll be really interested to see how they redesign it and how they redesign multiplayer to be more head-to-head rather than going up against, taking your crew and going up against, AI bots and things like that. That this might be much more of a PvP experience, and I'll be curious to see if they really kind of pursue that path.
Louis, great to catch up with you, to see you as always. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Josh. Take care.
Up next, a look at the biggest market themes this week. More Ask for a Trend. That's right on the other side. Well, the S&P 500 marking its best May in 30 years, with the NASDAQ surging nearly 10% this month. Yahoo Finance's Jared Blickry joining us now with the trading day takeaways, Jared.
Yeah, we got to start with this historic May because this was totally unexpected, especially in the depths of despair in April. And by the way, this was not only the best May since 1990, but the second best since 1948 and the fifth best since 1928. And that includes a bunch of crazy years in the 1930s. Everybody remembers those, right? All right, so here's the sector action over these 21 days. XLK, that is tech, that grabs the front. That is up 10%. Then industrials, that is up 8.8%. Then you got consumer discretionary communication services. Here's the S&P 500 itself up 6.2%. So all of these are outperforming. That's our definition, greater than the benchmark. And guess what? If you look at the NASDAQ, you can really see some of these high flyers here in the Mag 7, these big market cap. NVIDIA up over 20%. So was Broadcom. So was Tesla. That's 3 out of the top 8. Apple is kind of a black eye there, but whatever. And then if you look at the Dow, very similar story. Healthcare was the worst performing sector, if you remember, the only one in the red there. And so we've got United Health down 26% and Merck down about 10%, Josh.
All right, so May, solid. What's
Yes.
coming next?
So I ran some stats on June, and I'm going to be doing a deep dive on Monday morning. And here's what I found so far. This is just looking at June, but I'm going to look ahead until the end of the year and also until next May, so a full year out. And what I did was I got this idea from Ryan Dietrich. He was looking at all the S&P 500 years where May was up more than a certain percentage. I think he was using 4%. I decided to use 3% because it gives a few more data points and 18 in total going all the way back to 1928. I sloughed off a few because I started at 1950, but the net result is June is one of the worst months, but still up 0.6%. So about half of 1%, and it's positive 61% of the time. Nothing to write home about, admittedly, but here's where the things get interesting here. S&P 500 since 1928 is less than that. It's about half of the returns and up a slightly less percent positive at the time. That's up 58% of the time. And then if we go since 1990, June is actually one of the 2 worst months. I think September is actually the worst, and that's only up about 0.6%. So the bottom line is June is not a great month, but given the strong May performance, it should be a little bit better. That gives it just a little bit better tilt. And if you recall, we were expecting a bullish April. That did not materialize. So I want to add a grain of salt here. Anything with the tariffs can kind of derail what we're talking about here in terms of seasonality.
Final question. What would be on your wall of worry? What are the risks, the concerns we need to think about?
Exactly. I'm looking at Bitcoin, a Bitcoin rug pull, because I have been looking at the price action. One of the things that Bitcoin has done historically, and let's get off this screen and get to Bitcoin. And let's actually show the trailing month here in crypto. So Bitcoin is up 11.2%, Ethereum's up 44%. These are nice numbers. But the chart was a little concerning because one of the things that Bitcoin is famous for is breaking to new highs, and these are new highs right here, and then just descending and kind of reversing the trend. So if you see this trend line that I'm drawing in right here, it has broken the trend line. 105,000 is a make or break. You can see it's right below it right now. So I want to see it kind of climb above that, and then it'd be nice to get to new highs early next week. And then in terms of the general market, I have noticed that Bitcoin has been leading. So if Bitcoin falters here, maybe we do get that June surprise to the downside. So Bitcoin is going to be one of the things I'm watching over this weekend.
I was going to ask you this weekend, is it Bitcoin? Is it the greenback?
If I have to watch something, it might as well be Bitcoin, Josh.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jared. Perfect. Coming up, what a strong Memorial Day weekend box office means for the rest of the summer. More Ask for a Trend. That's right on the other side. Consumers spent over $329 million at the box office over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend, an all-time high, with Disney's Lilo & Stitch taking in over $182 million. This comes after 2024, which had the worst 4-day performance in nearly 3 decades. According to our next guest, though, this year's rebound could kick off a summer movie season that could reach over $4 billion in total grosses. But will it be enough to keep studios and theaters in the green? Paul DeGarabedian, ComScore's senior media analyst, joins us now. Paul, it is good to see you, as always. So the Memorial Day weekend box office, Paul, a record. First, let's start there. Why, Paul? What drove that?
Well, we had a first quarter, Josh, that was down about 12% versus last year, according to our ComScore data. And part of that was March, which was down 46% versus March of 24. Then comes along a little movie called a Minecraft movie, and that blew the doors off and kept playing really strongly. And then Sinners, as we all know, had one of the lowest second weekend drops ever. So both those films overperformed opening weekend, and then they've had legs, as we say in the business, the long-term playability. And then The Accountant 2 opened, and then Marvel's Thunderbolts to kick off the summer, and then Final Destination Bloodlines. Every single one of those films has overperformed and had, more importantly, long-term playability. That gave the best possible tailwinds heading into Memorial Weekend, with Mission, Stitch, Possible, whatever you want to call it, just really bringing so much attention to the movie theater. And that's why you see that massive 329 million four-day domestic record-breaking weekend for Memorial Day. This is huge for theaters right now.
And did you see any of those movies yourself, Paul, over that Memorial Day weekend? Any recommendations?
Yeah, Mission Impossible. I saw that in IMAX. And, the premium formats are very important when you talk about IMAX, 4DX, Dolby Vision. Even though consumers are price sensitive, when it comes to certain movies, audiences really want that premium experience. And that's going to happen a lot more this summer. You have a movie like, if you take F1, for example, from Warner Brothers and Apple, that's a big one. Obviously, DC and Warner Brothers, Superman, which is on the way. And then, of course, Fantastic Four down the line for Marvel. So I just think it was the momentum thing going on. Movies very well marketed. Audiences are in the mood to go to the movie theater. This is, after all, the summer movie season. And it's really playing out well. And this ain't the end. This isn't a one-hit wonder of hits in terms of the box office. We have a lot more to come. Karate Kid Legends opens this weekend. That's from Sony Pictures. And on it goes. Ballerina is up next. And a lot of kids' movies, which PG movies have been at the forefront of the box office for the past year and a half at least.
And Paul, you say here, turn ahead to the summer, you say, we're certainly looking at a $4 billion plus summer, potentially $4.2 billion plus. Yeah. How come, Paul? What gives you that optimism, that confidence?
Yeah, Josh, that's a great question, because last summer we got to $3.7 billion. But remember, last summer fell victim to not having a Marvel movie to kick off the summer. Memorial Weekend, as you point out, was one of the lowest grossing ever. And that's because last year, was impacted by the strikes, production schedule disruption, and then chaos to the release calendar. And that threw everything to disarray. And that summer of 24 didn't really get started until Bad Boys Ride or Die in early June, and then really with Inside Out 2 in mid-June. This year's a completely different story. I defy anyone to find at least 5 movies that they aren't super anxious to see on that big screen in a movie theater. It's almost a champagne problem. There's almost too many films. Audiences have to figure out, how are they going to budget for that? And theaters have to budget out screen space, real estate for all these big, especially the premium formats. So it's a good situation, much better than last year, but a lot going on here for sure.
In terms of the movies on the way, Paul, this summer, maybe even this fall, what would be on your number one must-see?
Well, Superman, look, I'm a dog lover. Everybody knows this. And when Crypto the Superdog, especially in the first teaser trailer for Superman, when Crypto came on the screen and he's basically saving Superman, they have me at hello on that one. And then F1, I love racing, I love cars. I'm just speaking for myself, but F1 just looks like the movie that get a lot of people into Formula One that maybe not be racing aficionados. It's Brad Pitt, Joe Kosinski who directed Top Gun Maverick. And I wouldn't count out films like How to Train Your Dragon, Smurfs, Megan 2.0, The Phoenician Scheme, The Naked Gun. I mean, I could just go on and on. And a lot of summers, Josh, they kind of wrap up like in early August, and then sometimes Labor Day isn't a big weekend. This year, very different. Movies from now, every week until Labor Day Monday. And then it goes beyond that, as you asked, and certainly towards the end of the year, and there's a lot others in there. But Wicked for Good and Avatar Fire and Ash, need I say more? I think it's a great year for theaters.
Paul, just listening to you always gets me excited about the pipeline. Thank you, sir. Always love the enthusiasm.
Thank you, Josh.
Here are the earnings we're watching next week. Some big names on deck, including Dollar General, Lululemon, and Broadcom. Starting off with Dollar General, the discount retailer, reporting Q1 earnings before the markets open on Tuesday. Analysts are anticipating a modest sales improvement driven by new store openings. More people visiting the stores, but they're spending less per trip. Discount rival Dollar Tree reports on Wednesday. And looking at Lululemon, the specialty retailer announcing results for the first quarter on Thursday. Analysts expecting sales to grow, but at a slower pace than forecast. And finally, Broadcom posting second quarter results after the markets close on Thursday. Although the company competes against AI giant NVIDIA, it's still considered a key player in the AI chip market. Analysts expecting a strong quarter for Broadcom with 43% annual growth in its AI processor revenue. Well, that is a wrap on today's Ask for a Trend. Have a great weekend.